The parallels between Michigan and Ohio State's seasons continue to draw closer and closer together. These are two second-half teams. These are two teams that dominated Penn State. One was a top 10 win at home, the other was a top 15 win on the road. Equally impressive in different regards. Both have blown out Rutgers, and both have dominated Michigan State, dominated Indiana, and both play a close game against Maryland. More specifically and more interesting, both teams, a week before their matchup, struggle in games that were viewed as potential trap games or look-ahead spots. I mentioned this in both preview videos for both games. Now, I didn't think that either team would overlook the opponent to the degree where they would struggle against them, or to give the opponent credit. I didn't expect Maryland and Illinois to play as good of football games as they did, but they did, and Ohio State and Michigan played down to their competition, in my opinion. And we're going to talk about Ohio State versus Maryland, and Michigan versus Illinois was much more dramatic, because Illinois, after that last Chase Brown TD run to make the score 17-10, you really felt like Illinois was in control of the game, and it was only thanks to Jake Moody and Michigan's defense and their offensive line and tight ends that they got back in the game and won by 2. Ohio State only trailed at the half, and after a 17-0 third quarter, Maryland was playing catch-up, and there were moments where, it was not guaranteed that Ohio State was going to hold on, but Ohio State's win probability never dipped below like 67%. So I'm going to keep this video somewhat short and sweet, but Ohio State didn't play their A game. The Buckeyes trailed 13-10 at half, thanks to a CJ Dupree 1-yard pass from Taulia Tagovailoa, who, by the way, 26 of 36 for nearly 300 yards and 2 passing touchdowns, and only one fumble that was, that one fumble had, I think it happened with less than 10 seconds left, and Maryland was down by 6, and they were inside their own 10. You can't really blame that on him when, even if that fumble didn't happen, it wouldn't have mattered. Ohio State just would have won 36-30 instead of 43-30. The final touchdown being a Steel Chambers 1-yard fumble return. Maryland actually outgained Ohio State in total yards, 402 to 401, and Maryland had 1 turnover. Ohio State had none. OSU was 0 of 1 on 4th down. Maryland was 1 of 1. But perhaps one of the biggest differences being that Maryland had 2 field goals. Ohio State had 3 field goals, but Ohio State at the end of the day also had 4 touchdowns. Maryland had 3 touchdowns and a defensive 2-point conversion. The 4 touchdowns for OSU, of course, being offensive. They had an additional defensive touchdown, as I've already mentioned, at the end of the football game. Ohio State suffered somewhat of a scare, but they survived. 43-30 and 36-30. They would have won regardless of whether that fumble occurred or not. Ohio State just was mentally tougher, more talented, you name it, more disciplined. Mike Locksley teams, this was one of their more disciplined games, and even then with the talent they had assembled, they couldn't run the football. They had 10 penalties for 97 yards. Ohio State had 11 penalties for 97 yards, but they ran the football better. They executed better on 3rd down. Their defense especially, just looking at the final play, like the fumble recovery, the scoop and score, and all these different things. Maryland came to play, and they had a good game, but Maryland's A game, I'd say this is an A game for Maryland, like competing with Ohio State. It reminded me a good amount of their game against Michigan. The difference is, of course, Michigan's offense is worse, so they didn't score as much points, but their defense is better, and they allowed slightly less amount of points. That's what this game reminded me of. And even though Maryland brought their A game or their A-plus game, Ohio State's C to B game was still enough to beat them by 6 points offensively and beat them by 13 total points. And I mean, I don't care that the touchdown really was at the end of the game. It still counts. Like whether it's a garbage time TD or not, they won the football game. They won it by 13 points. But neither Ohio State or Michigan covered the spread. None of them did. Maryland played their heart out, but OSU's defense didn't break. At the beginning of the game, Maryland could have been up 14-7 at the end of the first quarter if those 2 early field goals were touchdowns, but of course they weren't. Jim Knowles' defense, allowing 30 to Maryland is not amazing. Jim Knowles, knowing just who he is from his press conferences and his resume, probably hates this and is going to drill his players about it. But they did their job because Ohio State's offense is just going to score north of 30, or more accurately, north of 40 most times offensively, unless they are playing like a top 10 defense. OSU's defense didn't break. In the game is guaranteed to be a battle of undefeateds. That to me is what's most important here. As a Michigan fan, and I imagine for a lot of Ohio State fans, it's important too. 11-0 versus 11-0. TCU struggled to beat Baylor. And you know what the beauty is if you're a Buckeye fan or if you're a Michigan fan? South Carolina is beating Tennessee 56-31. And Spencer Rattler looks like the first-round pick that everyone projected him to be. So, I mean, to me, I don't know what's more unexpected or more toxic. Indiana beating Michigan State on the road, or South Carolina blowing out Tennessee like how they blew out Florida last year. I mean, Hendon Hooker has 3 passing touchdowns, and Spencer Rattler has 5 passing touchdowns and nearly 400 passing yards. Georgia couldn't even score. I mean, Georgia, they held back, but if you watch that game, Georgia was in no position to score more than like maybe 40 against Tennessee. South Carolina might score 63 by the end of this football game against what is viewed as the number 5 or number 4 team in the country. But games guaranteed to be a battle of undefeateds, and Tennessee losing certainly helps. And we'll see how USC-UCLA goes at the time of this recording. This is being recorded Saturday night. Going to be released Sunday morning, Sunday mid-afternoon. Dallan Hayden had himself a game in replacing TreVeyon Henderson. Henderson had I think a 31-yard receiving touchdown, if I'm not mistaken. And he, did okay, including, the 31-yard receiving touchdown and 19 rushing yards, but he had 11 carries, and eventually he was taken out, and Dallan Hayden replaced him. Hayden had 27 carries for 146 rushing yards, averaged 5.4 yards per carry, and he had 3 rushing touchdowns with a long of 18. He also had 10 receiving yards on 2 receptions with a long of 10, the other being a no-gainer. But he did well, and running back depth entering the game, let me tell you something as a Michigan fan. If both starting running backs, like for both teams, are out, I would give OSU the edge at running back. I think Dallan Hayden is a better running back than CJ Stokes. It's my opinion. Ohio State had success running the football and stopping Roman Hemby. Their run defense and run offense performed well, and that is going to help you win any Big Ten football game. And CJ Stroud did not play at an elite level. Make no mistake, he didn't complete 2/3 of his passes. He was 18 of 30 for 241 yards, averaged 8 yards per pass attempt, and he had just 1 passing touchdown, which was to TreVeyon Henderson. Emeka Egbuka led the team in receiving yards with 82 on 6 receptions. In second place was Marvin Harrison Jr., 5 receptions for 68 receiving yards. Maryland's passing game showed out much better. They had 27 receptions for 318 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, averaging nearly 12 yards per reception. Ohio State averaged around 13 yards per reception. And he didn't play at an elite level, but he did his job, ultimately. And in a game like this where, listen, Michigan and Ohio State, watching both of these games, especially paying very close attention to the Michigan one, because Illinois leading Michigan, I'm going to be all invested on every second of that game. These two teams were looking ahead to next week. There's no doubt about that. Now, Maryland and Illinois played better than I expected them to against Ohio State and Michigan, respectively, but both the Buckeyes and the Wolverines had their attention and had their sights on next weekend. There's no doubt about it. Ryan Day enters Week 13 now with a chance to complete his second 12 or more win season. The first being in 2019, his first year. If he beats Michigan or loses to Michigan but wins his bowl game, he has the opportunity to have 12 or more wins. And if he beats Michigan, then he'll have his second 12-win regular season, which, I mean, that's the best it can be, unless you play on the road at Hawaii. Then you have the chance for that 13th game, of course. Taulia Tagovailoa had a redemption game. He threw for 293 yards, 2 touchdowns, made some big-time throws, really big-time throws to Dante Demas, Raheem Jarrett, Ty Felton. Demas led the team in receiving yards with 67. It's been a long time since he has been Maryland's leading receiver. He's only had 153 receiving yards on the year and 1 receiving touchdown. He hasn't had close to the season he had last year, where he only played in 5 games before being devastatingly injured. Raheem Jarrett was next with 3 receptions for 65 yards. CJ Dupree and Jashawn Jones had 1 receiving touchdown, respectively, to equal Taulia Tagovailoa's 2 passing touchdowns. Maryland is now on a 3-game losing streak. They started out 6-2, losing to, I think they lost to Michigan, then they lost to Purdue. Those are their 2 losses. I think their last win was against Northwestern, which was a 7-point win, and then they fell to Wisconsin on the road, fell to Penn State, and now they've fallen to Ohio State. Can they break it versus Rutgers? Rutgers has had some not decent 4-quarter performances, getting blown out by Penn State and blown out by Michigan and just not playing great football. But they have shown some potential. Rutgers has. They played close with Michigan State. They beat Indiana. They played close with Nebraska. There are, the Michigan State and Nebraska games, those go a few plays change in those games, and Rutgers could be a bowl-eligible team. And Rutgers, I can tell you, they're more disciplined mentally than Maryland is, and that's just knowing who Greg Schiano is as a coach and knowing who Mike Locksley is as a coach. It's going to be interesting seeing if Maryland can win that game, because if so, they'll have their first regular season above 500 in quite some time. For Ohio State, just like for Michigan, it's simple. Win your last regular season game, blow out whatever team comes up in Indy, and claim the number 2 or potentially number 1 spot if Georgia somehow loses or looks bad in their next 2 games as the number 1 or number 2 seed in the college football playoff. And that's where I'm going to end this video. If you liked it, please make sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your score prediction for the Michigan-Ohio State game next weekend. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.